let me give you her information again, and it's not very extensive. I'm hoping she'll give us some more when she comes on. I read this yesterday. I'm going to read it again today. Vicky Davis is a retired computer systems analyst programmer, which speaks highly of her right there. It takes an intelligent person to be able to do that. She worked primarily, but not exclusively, on IBM mainframe systems. The applications were business systems for large corporations and governments. She is an obsessive internet researcher, but because of her profession and training, she focuses on administrative systems, functions, institutions, and conversions from national to international systems. All of that's going to show up about this issue with regimes today and our IC, FBI, etc. And I might add also SES and CERCO and all that you're hearing about now all impact what she's going to talk to you about today. She has two websites, the technocratictyranny.com, also channelingreality.com, both of those, and also her 9 a.m. 9 a.m. till noon show on Saturdays, governamerica.com with Darren Weeks. All that information will be in the description box if it isn't already. And I tried to load that this morning. So that's just a real short little bit of information about her. I'm going to give her a call now and get her coming on for us. Let me get rid of this so I don't get confused on that. Okay, and we'll check. All right, so here we go. Let's see if we can get her on. Well, good morning, Vicky. How are you? Well, good. You know, I so much appreciate you coming on. I don't know if you've been listening to the show, but I've kind of been priming the information that you're going to bring up. I hope you found that not too far off course and somewhat applicable. Okay. Well, let me put you on the speakerphone and we'll do a couple of sound tests and make sure that that's working the way it needs to. And you can just start talking when I give you the go. So you'll have the floor. You know, you're so versed in this and you have such good information and technical understanding that I don't want to really interrupt you. I do have a few questions, but I'll try to gently put those in and not try to interrupt you too much. So here we go. I'm putting you on speaker. Okay, Vicky, why don't you start letting us know a little bit about what the subject matter is?
Okay, well, what the subject matter with me always is about systems. And because everything that's going on with globalization has to do with systems and the conversions of our governments, integrating them into these systems, you know, national systems for our local governments and international systems for the national governments, but not exclusively. We do have, we had some legislation come through Idaho a couple of years ago that would integrate our Idaho state health and welfare as it pertains to child support into an international system that's run out of The Hague. And so we thought that we lost on it, but that's the kind of thing that I'm always looking at is these systems and the source of the authority for doing it and what the impact is. So.
Well, great. You said in your article that there is this difference between regime change and regime policy or regime organization, that type of thing. Could you address that so people kind of know how this influences things like the FBI? You don't have to mention the FBI necessarily yet, but get into this whole concept of what regime really is to these people.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, all during what's been going on in the Middle East, you know, when the newspapers write about it, they write about regime change. And I never really thought about that word, that term, regime change. I just assumed that it meant changing out the leadership of the government, but, the essential government stays intact except for Afghanistan and Iraq, which we destroyed their whole country, the whole organizational structure. But when I was researching international health care as it pertains to global health, the global health system that's being built and implemented, I came across a term called regime theory. And, since there was a theory associated with regime, I thought I should really look it up, and I did, and it was like a light bulb, came on in my head, and I could kick myself for not thinking about it before, but, you just have the definitions of words that and those are the ones that you stick with, and you make an assumption that when words are used in newspapers and on television, that they are using the same definition that and you can't do that anymore. You can't do that at all, because there are some words that are program words, like sustainable development. Everybody knows that sustainable development at this point is a program word. It stands for a whole big body of law and philosophy and doctrine and all of that. Anyway, we really have to listen to the words and make sure that we know that what our understanding of the word is what they're really talking about.
Good. Maybe I can also ask you the fact that where this thing influenced me and why I became so concerned about it, and how it addresses all the issues that we're having with our law enforcement agencies, our government agencies, particularly things like the FBI and the CIA, etc. You mentioned that this has impacted the Five Eyes Pact, the Five Eyes Intelligence Pact, and what that really is, that in itself is a regime. You brought in the National Security Act. You've talked about congressional approvals of actually handing over power and autonomy to these organizations, where they've actually become nations in and to themselves. Could you address that for us?
Yeah, if you use the significance of the word regime is that it also includes the definition that's most relevant is a mode of rule or management. Okay, so basically you could say it's a management system. A regime is a management system. And in this PowerPoint presentation that I found that was produced by the political science chair of international relations for some university, they said they define regime as implicit or explicit principles, norms, rules, and decision-making procedures around which actors' expectations converge in a given area of international relations. And they give as examples international treaties, institutions, and agreements. So they're saying that a regime could be an international treaty or an agreement. And they give as an example the IAEA, which is the International Atomic Energy Agency. They give the World Trade Organization and the International Monetary Fund. Now, I'd never really thought about those organizations as regulatory agencies, but under the agreements that have been signed and put into law by the United States, actually the WTO is a regulatory agency. It's kind of a hybrid regulatory agency and judicial agency because corporations can bring cases to the WTO and essentially sue our country under, in WTO tribunal. So they are a regulatory and judicial authority. So if that's true, then we're in a world of hurt because I have a 2009 copy of all of the treaties and agreements that the United States has signed, become involved in, and it's over 400 pages long in very fine print, like 8-point type. And the only thing listed in there is just the name of the agreement. It doesn't even include the text of the agreement. So the United States is so intertwined into an international system of law based upon the treaties and agreements that they've become involved in, that I'm not really sure how relevant our domestic law is. Of course, it pertains to us as individuals, and they come down really hard on us as individuals. But when you're talking about, businesses and relations between nations, I'm not sure how relevant our national laws are and how much representation we have. Okay? And, now, as it pertains to this Five Eyes Pact, that is...
Let me interrupt you here and make sure that the people here understand what that is. I think they do. But the Five Eyes Pact is basically a surveillance pact between the 5 countries. That's what that's talking about. It's the U.S., Britain, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Now, the fact of the matter is, the other 4 are all related under the British Commonwealth. So really, it's only 2 nations, but I think you get the idea. So that's what this is, and you've heard about a little bit in the news lately about, it's supposed to be, it is actually against the law to surveil U.S. citizens by U.S. Intelligence agencies. But what they'll do is, well, they do it anyway. But if they get caught, they say, well, we didn't do it, it was Britain that was doing it. Or they might not want to admit that Britain's doing it, like this whole situation that's come about under the surveillance of President Trump. That was denied at first. As a matter of fact, the MSM called it ridiculous that Britain was involved, and now we find out that they were. MI6 and the other organization, which escapes me right now, were in fact doing it, and we know that now. So just so everybody knows what the Five Eyes Pact is, it's the intelligence thing. Comey went to speak at it. I believe in New Zealand is where he went to discuss it, and you have that video linked in your article. So the important thing to know here is that the FBI is a regime. The intelligence community is a regime, and it's not representing the interests of the people of the United States. I'm sorry, Vicky, I just want to make sure they understood that. Go ahead.
No, that was great. That was a great explanation. The Five Eyes Pact was signed between Britain and the United States originally in 1946. And during the war, the United States and Britain cooperated on signals intelligence and code breaking and all of that stuff. And after the war, they continued on with this secure, quote, security arrangement. And, my personal opinion on the Cold War is that it was kind of a ruse, just so that Britain, the intelligence agencies, could continue on behind a curtain of national security. Our government was reorganized after the war in legislation called the National Security Act of 1947. And that's when they created the national security state. For a long time, they denied the existence of it. I think it's probably only been like within the last 25 years or so that it became public knowledge that they even exist. But when it was in the 1990s, 1990 in particular, that was the turning point year when they decided basically to redesign our government and utilizing technology to the maximum extent possible. Everybody attributes that to Al Gore, but it really started in 1990 with a decision by the G7 at the time. And the reinvention of our government included the redesign of systems like the FBI, their systems. And it gets kind of all connected because all of these systems are integrated. But, of course, the FBI is kind of like the center of power for law enforcement, and they always had the, I think it was NCIC or whatever,
Yes.
Where they would check criminal backgrounds and things. So the FBI kind of became a center of power for domestic law enforcement. Well, in the redesign of systems, there came a point of deciding whether the FBI should become part of the intelligence community or whether it should be separate from the intelligence community. And in that video that you just mentioned where Comey is speaking, he was the one who argued for the FBI to become part of the intelligence community. So what did that do? That basically put them under the Five Eyes Pact as a member of the intelligence community. So our FBI is not only domestic, they've become international. So they are operating under international agreements. And because they are, it makes me wonder if they actually have immunity, under the UN system or under this agreement. Of course, we can't really see the updated version of the agreement because it's secret. Everything in our government has become secret almost. So we don't really know, but it sure does seem like that they have immunity.
They certainly, if they don't have immunity, we're kind of seeing them being brought up to answer for what they've done here. Whether or not they are actually all, charged with crimes, that still remains to be seen. I'm certainly calling for it. But if they don't have immunity, I would say they at least act with impunity. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think a large part of it too is what they've kind of done is bifurcated our system of government. They've brought into the process private partners. So we have a situation where our government, with the systems of our government, they always had to be authorized in law. They could only do what is authorized in law. Corporations and businesses can do anything that's not prohibited by law. So if you have a partnership between a private entity, whether it be a profit-making corporation or a nonprofit, and government, then they can do anything that they want together. You see?
Yeah, if I can interject here one more time, there's a difference between constitutional law and Napoleonic law, and you're kind of touching on that now. We are not supposed to have a form of government and law in this country that's Napoleonic, which means that unless it is expressly permitted, it is prohibited. That's what Napoleonic law is, and you're kind of touching on that. The opposite is that, and what we're supposed to live under is that all things are permitted unless expressly prohibited. And so what they do, unfortunately, is they apply that international concept of Napoleonic law now to our people. Would you say that that's actually what's being done?
Yes, that we can't do anything unless it's expressly permitted.
Right, that be Napoleonic law. So our laws have been subverted by the very people that we put into place to protect our rights and our laws.
Well, that's the way the UN Charter is written, is that it lists the rights that you have, which if they can give you rights, they can take them away.
Right.
Our Constitution is written the other way. It limits what the government can do, not what we can do, you know, except for the Bill of Rights, which are express rights. Everything else that's not listed there is our right that the government can't prevent us from doing, theoretically.
Right, it even says in Article 10 that those not enumerated are left to the states or to the people. And at this point, Vicky, I'd like to read something out of your article, if I may, because I'd like to kind of go down this path. This is a paragraph. I'll just read this real quick. It says, this is quoting Vicky's article. There are other articles, but the point is that the intelligence community, right down to our local law enforcement, were and are part of an international regime that governs their activities, not the laws of the United States. This has to be true because it's the only possible explanation for the behavior of the FBI and Department of Justice relative to the Congress and the people of the United States. Information collection where there is no crime and parallel construction using that information to bring down a political adversary, we've seen that with the Trump deal, would not be the activity. Let me rephrase that, repeat that. Would not be the activity of an American law enforcement agency. An American law enforcement agency would consider anybody who did those things as an enemy of the state. Go ahead, Vicky.
Yeah, they are acting as if they are a foreign enemy of the country, at least in my opinion. If they use the surveillance system, and I did a story on the alleged Russian collusion. I wrote several of them, and it seemed to me that it was a setup whereby, I forget what that guy's name was, but they used him as kind of a, what would you say, a token or something. Just, they were putting him under serious surveillance as a spy. And so anybody that he talked to or had any dealings with was also considered suspect.
Yeah, he had a Title I surveillance on him. Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm. And so that's how they dragged Trump into it. But the setup arrangement, in order to have that happen, it appeared to me like it was a total setup. Like there was nothing real about it at all. They just needed to be able to designate this guy as a spy. And so...
Yeah, he actually held, I don't think it's the exact same status, but it's very similar to what I talked about with this Columbia law professor, this supposed friend of Comey's, Daniel Richman, who now we find out has special government employee status. And I believe that was the same situation, or very close to the one that you're talking about. So how is it that they're, yeah, it's almost, it's absurd, really, when you look at the whole situation.
Yeah, with our government, you said he has special government status. He may very well be involved in the intelligence community also. You know, there's an organization that the FBI is involved in. It's called InfraGard,
right.
And it includes media people. It includes the police. It includes citizens, you know, anybody that's might be likely to have information that the FBI or police might want to collect. It truly is an American study. It's a secret policing agency.
It might even be your neighbor, and most likely is.
Well, yeah, because they started up these neighborhood watch organizations. Now, I know that they've had neighborhood watch organizations for a long time, but they were neighbors that were, that started them. But a friend of mine was investigating a guy who was trying to start one in her neighborhood, and it was connected with the city, and I'm sure it, was the neighborhood spy. They want to get to know everybody. They want information on you. This whole information collection thing, and that's one thing that Comey said that I found really disturbing. There's a difference between an intelligence agency and a law enforcement agency. Law enforcement agencies don't go out just to collect information.
Well, they even admitted it back when I was in that arena. It was basically their whole process was about order maintenance and record keeping. And of course, if they could get there and stop a crime, that'd be one thing. But that's not really what their mission was. It was order maintenance, and that was very strongly put over on the students, in the police academy.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's what they should be doing. But once they join the intelligence community, and that's what Comey said, they go out and gather as much information from every source that they possibly can so that they can comb through it looking for potential crimes. Well,
and covering up the ones they don't want to be known. That's the other side of that. Yeah, InfraGard is, I've been very outspoken against that from the very start, and I kind of talked about it. I didn't name it when I started the broadcast here. But yeah, everybody wants to be a secret agent, so it's very sexy. It's very people get attracted to that, and so there are a lot of people involved in this, and it's really terrible. It is the Stasi state. You're absolutely right.
Mm-hmm. And I watched a hearing one day, and the issue was the number of confidential informants that the FBI, the ATF, and the DEA, how many confidential informants that they have on the payroll. And these are just people floating around out there looking for crime, gathering information. And like what happened to a friend of mine, they actually set him up.
Yes.
And so, if somebody is outspoken on any particular issue that goes against government policy, they have all these people out there that they can use to parallel construction, build a case on them, and take them down. I mean, that's...
accuse them of a crime even if there isn't one. And then, of course, they go through that whole plea deal where, they're basically using terrorist activity to enforce their agenda, which is, that is terrorism. That's the FBI's own definition of terrorism. But they'll use that, and people will plead because they see this Leviathan behemoth in front of them, and they know that they can't, or they feel like they can't fight it, and of course they normally can't. You and I were both involved to some extent. I know you were doing it from a reporting status, but in the Bundy situation and at the Malheur deal. And what you're talking about was very evident there, and we even talked about some of the informants that were in there doing their little lousy little work, and it had nothing to do with supporting the Constitution or the American people, but this regime that you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, yes, and with our criminal justice system, the process is the punishment.
Right.
And they don't even follow the law. With my friend, the search warrant was not
Sort of like the FISA warrant against President Trump based on the dossier.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a perfect example of what Vicky's talking about is absolutely true. They even did it to the President of the United States.
Mhm. Yeah, so they don't even follow the law. It's just all about keeping you in jail for as long as they possibly can, when there's really no reason to. But there's that whole prison for profit thing that is a factor. It's not the only factor, but it is a significant factor because they make a lot of money with people in jail. And so they drag out the process as long as they possibly can, because they know if they keep you in jail for a year and a half or 2 years, you'll probably plead just so you can get out, get away from them.
Yeah, it's horrible. And I didn't mean to get you off topic there. I don't want to read your whole article, but it's so fascinating. I got to bring up at least another paragraph or two of what you said, because you're talking about this difference between international agreements and the domestic law. So let me read this paragraph, because this has to do with Attorney General Jeff Sessions, which is one of the reasons why I don't trust him. And it was interesting that you brought this up. Let me read this, and then you can comment on it. This is in her article that we're referring here to. Recall when Trump took office and appointed Jeff Sessions to be the Attorney General, Sessions immediately recused himself because he was allegedly, and we found out later that the law used to apply this was incorrectly applied, but he went along with it anyway. He's some really great attorney, isn't he? Because he was allegedly under investigation for lying about exchanging a few pleasantries with a Russian ambassador at a conference. That obviously was a ruse, but the recusal allowed Rod Rosenstein to become the acting Attorney General for the alleged Russian collusion investigation, setting up a dual management system within the Department of Justice. One acting Attorney General for an international investigation, and I would say that Rosenstein is actually the power in the Department of Justice, and one appointed Attorney General for everything else domestic. Would you kind of address that, Vicky?
Mm-hmm. It crossed my mind that they would need an Attorney General for the international regime, as it seems to be. It's all secret. It has to be international, because what authority does the U.S. Attorney have to prosecute crimes that are international in scale? I don't believe he has any. So they really do need, under the way that the system is working, they do need a dual system. But if they came out in the open and said that, then that would clue people in that there's something really, really wrong with our government.
Yeah.
Okay? That we have a bifurcation within our government where we have people that are working on the international side and people that are working on the domestic side.
And we even have, even in the MSM now, sorry to interrupt again, but I like tying these in if it's okay, Vicky.
Sure,
we even have people in the MSM, Judge Napolitano, for instance, has said this, as has Janine Pirro and others, that it's now evident that there's a dual system of justice in the United States, one for them and the other for us. And what you have here is the description of what that system is.
Mm-hmm. Well, and this was not really the first time I found it. Where I found it initially was with a treaty that was signed in 1983, generally referred to as the La Paz Agreement, but it is a treaty, and it creates an international zone on the border, and it is under the authority, the dual authority of the American EPA administrator and their Mexican counterpart. Okay, now this treaty, and it was for allegedly for border cleanup. So they have working groups that work on the various areas, one of them being public health, the environment, transportation. I can't remember what all six were. But one of those where the bifurcation is really obvious was with Border Patrol. You know, Border Patrol, they're law enforcement, and they're supposed to prevent people from coming across the border. But under this international treaty, in the international zone that at the time was 60 miles on either side of the border, they had an organization called BORSTAR. BORSTAR's mission was search and rescue. So their job was to go rescue people in the desert who were crossing the border illegally. So in a way, it kind of, the way I could see it working was like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. We've got Border Patrol, they're law enforcement, gradually replaced by BORSTAR, which are also a uniformed service, but they're search and rescue.
That's interesting you should bring that up. When I did my documentary, Borders, Mexican Drug War or Insurgency, I ran into this very same problem that you're talking about. And when I was interviewing ranchers down on the border, one of the things that stands out when you go down and look at the border is that so much of the wall that existed at that time, I'm sure it's still, that part is still there, huge gaps in it, you know, and all that. But the thing that really stood out was the border was anywhere from, it might be on the river, you know, within, say, 10 yards or so on the American side. You'd have the wall, but more often than not, the border was hundreds of yards or even miles into American territory, into the American jurisdiction. Nowhere near the border, you know, not really, to stop the flow. And even then, there were gaps in the border. And I asked the ranchers, I said, who got away with this? And they brought up Napolitano at the time, Janet Napolitano, who was really against the border wall, and apparently the EPA, as you're saying, did get involved, and because of this treaty that you're mentioning, they agreed that they would not put the wall at that time on or near the river. So that treaty directly or that agreement directly put our American people, the ranchers there, in true physical danger, is what it ended up doing.
Well, yeah, and they got away with it. They basically took those ranchers' property out of the United States and put them in an international zone.
Right.
Under international law. And that treaty is, it was written as a framework. It's the kind of treaty where they can just add things to it. And it's my belief from reading that I think the NAFTA agreement was really an annex to that treaty.
Well, they also call it a constitution-free zone now, don't they?
Yes, they do.
They've actually said that. Judges, etc., said, well, you don't have rights there. That's a constitution-free zone under the auspices, under the pretense of anti-terror, counterterrorism, when in reality it's about stealing American land from Americans.
Yeah, and worse yet, it creates a breach in our law. It creates an open door, because the way they wrote that treaty, other organizations can join into that treaty. So they made it a potentially multilateral. And I think probably California joined into that international agreement. So putting themselves into an international zone.
Which is illegal, actually, under the Constitution. They can't do that.
Well, one would think, but they don't seem to have too much
Yeah, because there's there's nobody in the federal government that'll enforce it. This thing with immigration now, where they threaten to jail, and of course, whether that had ever really happened, I don't know. The mayor of San Francisco, and of course Jerry Brown, and all this. There are no teeth in the federal government to enforce true constitutional law. There aren't people willing to do that. And that's one of the big weaknesses I found in the Constitution, is that there's no prescription for intent of, and I realize the difference between constitutional law and statute law, but there's nothing there that says that there will be a statute created, for instance, under the U.S. Code for those who violate their constitutional requirements. And that's why a lot of this happens, is because there is no teeth. That's one of the weaknesses in the Constitution.
Mm-hmm. Well, and besides that, even if that were not true, we don't know which regime of law applies.
Good point.
Is it international law under a treaty? Which, if you, one of the organizations that could join into the La Paz Agreement is the United Nations. So if the United Nations joins in, then all of these agreements, they're all compounding.
It's a surreptitious way of bringing the New World Order, using, what do they call it, creeping, I forget the term, but anyway, they're slowly bringing it in so that we don't realize that it's happening.
Exactly. That's absolutely right. And they've been doing this, well, since 1945, when they agreed to participate in the United Nations. I do believe that the United Nations is actually an entity like the Commonwealth of Nations. I think the Commonwealth of Nations, which used to be the British Commonwealth, by the way, was the model. It's an interagency, intergovernmental association that supposedly all the nations can participate in these agreements voluntarily, but if a nation doesn't participate in it, then of course you've got regime change, right?
Right, that's the next step. If they don't bow down, then regime change to liberate the people is the next step. Isn't that a joke?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was something interesting that I found as I was getting materials ready to talk about today, is that in 1999, the Democratic Leadership Council had an article about NATO becoming more or less the bodyguard for globalization.
Terrifying when you consider the Red Guard, Operation Gladio, all that. That's just bad news. Bad news.
Mm-hmm. And there was a meeting actually, and I think it was on April 25th. You can go watch it. It was on C-SPAN. And I was watching it yesterday. And it was Bill Clinton and 4 or 5 other leaders of the European countries talking about third way. And third way was their idea of governance in the 21st century, a new method of governance. But of course, what they're talking about are systems. The governance for the information age, which is government by system. And I don't know if they didn't understand this, but all computer systems are management and control systems. And they always lead to centralization because it's just the nature of the beast. And that's why Amazon is so big. That's why Google is so big. Because it's just the nature of computer systems and how they operate. Whoever is the biggest one sets the rules for the others, and the others can't really survive. Only one survives. So in the whole globalization of countries, where they're bringing them into all of these integrated systems at the global level, under each regime there will only be one system that survives. It's global totalitarianism by definition.
Wow, you just made a huge revelation, Vicky, how dangerous this has become. Wow. Now, and then on top of that, we've got the whole problem with AI running the whole thing.
Yes, yes. And we can see the problem with AI, with how a lot of accounts got deleted off of Facebook and YouTube because they wrote a program, probably a quick and dirty, to search for keywords and then shut them down. But you really can't do that kind of thing, just searching for keywords. Who selects the keywords? And any word changes meaning depending on the context in which you use it.
Or the definition, like in legal terms, a person is not the same thing in legal terms as we consider it in everyday language.
Right, and like the word regime that's got 4 or 5 definitions. Which definition were they using it in? So it's really not a workable system. Actually, from my point of view as an analyst, this whole global structure is not a workable system for governing countries because there are too many agencies of the United Nations, too many conflicts of interest, and we can see in our own country one size does not fit all. Never does.
Vicky, this is wonderful. We're coming up on a time where I probably ought to let you go, but I want to read the last 2 paragraphs in your article. And as I'm reading these, if you would just consider, because you do have such a command of this, if you could help us to discover, if it's discoverable, if it's even possible, what the treatment, what the prescription, what it is that we need to do, if we even can, to counter this. So think about that as I'm reading this last couple of paragraphs. Again, this is from Vicky's article. The question of who is really running our government, considering the blatant and un-American activities that we see every day from the FBI, this is my parenthetical comment, from the FBI, from the Justice Department, from the intelligence community, from the BLM, from the Department of the Interior, from the Congress, etc., etc. I mean, the whole bunch of them. The un-American activities that we see every day is more important than merely a passing curiosity. The system, as it appears, operates like an invasion of the body snatchers. Americans being thrown out, replaced by internationalists who are destroying the country and waging war on American citizens from within the government itself. And we definitely saw that on the ground at Bundy Ranch with the war machine that was facing those good American cowboys. The following is a link to a video of James Comey talking about the FBI as an intelligence agency. And then she lists the video. So in that little time that I read that, Vicky, you got any ideas on how we can fix this?
Well, one thing I know for sure is that you can't fix anything if you don't understand it, because our politicians and the media and our government, they have been lying to us for a long time. Even when I started researching and the North American Union, they denied its existence. They denied the existence of the NAFTA superhighway until we produced so much documentation that they could no longer deny it. So that is the one thing I know, is that anybody that is going to try to fix anything, you better really know what you're talking about, and don't go to them with just these general talking points from the political parties. As a matter of fact, just take your party hat off, throw it away, because you need to think with a whole brain, your whole brain. And whatever issue it is that is your interest, whether it's education or healthcare or subject matter inside and out, so that your politician, your government leaders, I hate to call them leaders, but
that's definitely
people can't slither away from you, slither away from the subject area, because they're really good about that. They're really good at the filibuster, and they're really good at subtly switching topics. But if you know your subject matter, they can't do that to you.
Historically, Vicky, when a government, when a nation got to this point, it became so corrupted internally that it fell apart and was destroyed. And the elites know that. They know that that's what happens, and so that's the reason why they put in this huge surveillance, computer, technocratic tyranny, as you call it, because they realize that unless they have that influence, that it's going to fall. And I will just say publicly here that I pray, literally, I pray that they have miscalculated and that this becomes their own destruction, because that's our only hope. Vicky, I want to thank you for this wonderful education into what's happened in our country and in the world. And I've always just really appreciated all of your hard work, and you get so deep into everything. I want to encourage people who want to know more about all of these different things and all of the stuff that you're talking about as far as needing to know your material. Vicky Davis has a great understanding and has written a lot on all of these subjects, and I would like to invite Vicky now to tell us a little bit about her websites, her radio program, and where you all can. I put it in the description box, but I'd like to hear it from you too, Vicky, and then we'll sign off.
Okay. All right. Well, my first website was channelingreality.com, and I have probably a lot of my best and early research there. As I was trying to figure things out, the bad part about it is that it's not very coherent in terms of subject matter, because I wrote about things as I figured them out, as I found out about them. So you kind of have to use the search box there, and for whatever subject it is that you're interested in, just type it in the search box, and you'll find lots of articles written at different times. My newer website, I had to get a new website because of the change in technology, but it's called the Technocratic Tyranny, and on that website, I'm actually bringing together a lot of the research that I did on the old website, but I'm trying to put it into a context where it is like a complete body of work, so that you can follow the beginning point, where I consider the beginning point of something happening, and go through it to the end. And I know people will think probably it's kind of bizarre that I spend a lot of time on a highway system, but it was important because the highway system technology is the surveillance and control technology. So
wonderful. And then you have a radio program on Saturday mornings. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, Darren Weeks and I have a radio program, and we just talk. We don't have any particular subject that we talk about. We just talk about things that are happening currently, or when what I know about in my research in the past applies, I'll talk about that. Bring that into the current context of the current story.
And how do they find this? How do they find your radio program?
Just governamerica.com.
Okay. Vicky, I want to thank you so very, very, very much for taking this time with us this morning. I think that this is, I'm not patting myself on the back here, but frankly, I think this is probably one of the most important interviews that has happened in our country and maybe in the world to date. And I know that sounds crazy, but considering the information that Field McConnell of Able Danger has brought out about Serco and the senior executive service, and even if a lot of people poo-poo that and say, well, that's not a big deal, well, it is, because of what you have actually done now is you've tied in how large this thing is and how pervasive it is in our system and how dangerous it is. So it's actually been synergistic to understanding what Field McConnell has pulled out and explained, as well as others. And it's indispensable. Whether or not we can save the Republic ourselves, I don't know. I still feel like that, and I guess I'm a little bit of a pessimist in this regard. I'm afraid that the whole thing will be destroyed because of the things that we've talked about today, that the elite have overplayed their game. They believe that they can defy times and laws and make it go their way, and I don't think it will. But because of that, we definitely have to have our radar on and be aware of the dangers and the opportunities that we're facing. So Vicky, thank you very, very much. And is there anything you'd like to end on?
Well, no, just thank you for having me. And I have to say, I have a lot of pessimism, but I keep working on it. And so that means I still have optimism that we can fix it, that we can get it back. But we have to get it back from this international system. All of these agreements that have captured our government and the internationalists who have captured our government, we have to get out of the agreements and get rid of these internationalists. And that's the only way we're going to have our republic back.
And let's hope that that's the game plan for Donald Trump. There are a lot of questions about what's really going on with him, but I do sincerely hope and pray that that's his ultimate objective. Vicky, thanks so much. We'll stay in touch, okay?
Okay, thank you, Roy.
Out here.
Bye-bye.
Well, there she goes, ladies and gentlemen. What a lady. The incredible amount of knowledge and understanding that she has. Wait till you go to her websites and you look at those things. Just about any topic you might be concerned about. There are a lot of places you can go for your information, but this type of thing is what we need. This type of research and this type of dedication from this very good lady. Well, we're coming up on an hour and a half here, and I've kept you all for a long time. Thank you for coming. I hope you found this interesting. Even I learned some stuff here, so I'm really happy about it. But this is a very difficult time. We are entering in a position, as I've said in the last few videos, that the deep state is striking back, and it's going to get worse. Donald Trump is in danger. I sure hope. I pray that he really is what he appears to be. And the few mistakes that he's made, that he realizes that, and he'll get back on course and stay there. We're going after the sexual predators. We're going after the traitors. We're going after the career criminals and the elites. We've got this dual system of justice that everybody recognizes, but we're trying to work through it. And I do hope and pray, because we will not survive if Donald Trump doesn't take these people down. We're not going to get a second chance. Okay? Donald Trump must act, and he must act now and push through. He must push through the defensive lines of the enemy and go to their rear and destroy everything that they have set up. That's really what has to be done. Will it happen? I pray that it does. God bless all of you. Keep your eyes on the horizon, your ears on the ground. We could be running into some really bad things here in the next few days, weeks. I always caution about that, but it's always better to be prepared, a year too early than a minute too late. So that's why I keep pushing on that. Keep your situational awareness up, especially at this point in time. Be aware that this Stasi state is out here, and that there are people that will try to get you in trouble for speaking out or doing the right thing, because of what Vicky's talked about today and what we've discussed. And again, God bless you. God bless all yours. God bless the Constitutional Republic of the United States of America and the Second American Revolution. And may God bless Donald Trump in all of his righteous endeavors. And may the Spirit of God descend upon him as the dews from heaven, enlightening his discernment so that he can make the right decisions and have the courage to implement.